In places where people think that men should be tough, where you should be a vigilante, where a man should enforce law and order, where he should take the law into his own hands and wield a gun, those kind of places tend to endorse wife beating.
Talking about bringing some kind of gender equality to a society, to a culture, right?
Yes.
How do you do that?
Let's say there are three very important drivers. One, job creating economic growth. So East Asia used to be incredibly patriarchal. Women were unfree, they were oppressed, their marriages were arranged. So a woman might be taken from one house, told to marry another, and then secluded and surveilled. So in China, the turn of the 20th century, many women had their feet broken and bound. And that was to signal their chastity, to show that they weren't going to leave the inner quarters. And if you look at Chinese poetry, women talk about how sad they are, their lack of freedoms, they don't own their own land, they're in someone else's home. So women were terribly, terribly abused. But that changed with job creating economic growth, with massive manufacturing. As I said, the income compensated for men's loss of honor. So women were allowed to go to the cities where they mixed and mingled and saw alternatives and started dating independently. They also remitted earnings back to their parents, and they demonstrated filial piety. So parents came to favor daughters. So South Korea, for example, there's now a preference for daughters because they're seen as equally valued. And that also interacts with having public pensions. So now that parents in South Korea don't have so much economic insecurity, it's fine to have a daughter. So it's really, really important to have massive job creating economic growth because that's what drives up female employment. Female employment is instrumentally important because it enables women to gather. It enables women to share ideas. It enables them to bitch and moan and complain about patriarchy, right? So anthropologists will talk about reverse dominance coalitions. That is, women getting together and contesting patriarchal privileges and saying, hey, don't mansplain to me, or don't treat me like I'm an idiot, or don't be so rude, or defending their friends. Or if their friend is abused and maltreated, talking to say, hey, you deserve better. So lots of women may endure abusive or horrific maltreatment, whether it is from their brothers, their fathers, their co-workers, their bosses, or their husbands, because they just don't question it. Or maybe they don't think they can do any better, or because they don't think there's any alternative. But if they get together with other women, if they see ni uno menos, then they may come to reject that ideology of shame and stigma that keeps women silent and afraid, that stops them from demanding accountability. So that is the second mechanism. Reverse dominance coalitions. And that can be you and your friend. It's not necessarily a female friend. It can be a male friend. It can be a protest. It can be a street demonstration. It can be social media. So, for example, the Azul Mineral. Have you heard the song, the Azul Mineral song that was in many Latin American protests on the 8th of March?
Yes.
There are these women and they're like, for however many centuries women have been abused and we're not going to take it anymore. And I can't remember the lyrics, but right, it's a very powerful chant, right? And if you look at TikToks of women's marches or protests in Latin America, they often use the La Crespa chant because it's all about creating this sense of solidarity that women have been abused for so long and we're not going to take it anymore. And so it's all about building a sense of solidarity, and that's very, very important. So that's the second mechanism. So first, it's high female employment. Second is feminist activism. Not just the big protests, but also little groups of solidarity that could even be two sisters. A third important driver is state capacity. And this is important for two reasons. In very anarchic situations, like maybe northern Mexico, especially historically, men have to act tough so that other guys don't mess with them. So you have this idea of machismo, right? Men acting tough. And systematically across Latin America, in places where people think that men should be tough, where you should be a vigilante, where a man should enforce law and order, where he should take the law into his own hands and wield a gun, those kind of places tend to endorse wife beating. So you get these very, very macho guys who need to express that toughness. And that general criminality tends to be associated with more punitive authoritarianism over their wives. And it's important for another reason. So in Latin America, there have been these massive protests, as we were saying, about gender-based violence. But still, the state is often perceived as criminal, as incapable, and as inept. And this means that two things, that women may not report gender-based violence, or the police may not do anything about it. And so male impunity for gender-based violence can continue. So a friend of mine, Carolina Artiga, has just done some nice research in Puerto Rico, and they find that there are these new domestic violence courts for women. But they haven't changed anything because people still think the state is corrupt. They still think the police won't do anything about it. Pulumi Roy Chowdhury over in India has a very nice book called Incapable States, Capable Women. And even if women go to the police, even if they beg for help, the police are so overburdened, they say, hey, just go away, women, go away. So a big problem in Latin America specifically, and also in places like India and Sub-Saharan Africa, is even though you have female employment, even though you have massive feminist rallies, if people think the state won't help them, then that male impunity for violence can persist. And let me give a personal example. So when I was in Oaxaca in Mexico, I was actually attacked. I was punched in the face, a guy grabbed my phone, etc. And I was covered in blood. So I run. Anyway, I call up the police. What do? Nothing. Right? And so I imagine, and many Mexicans have a similar perception of the police. You know, if you think the police is useless, then you don't go to them for help. But that means that men continue to get away with violence and know that they can continue to get away with violence. So you need those three conditions: high female employment because it enables the solidarity, the reverse dominance coalitions, and the capable state. If you don't have all three of those conditions, then it doesn't work. For example, China has high female employment and a strong state, but it doesn't have feminist activism. So the state continues to be very, very authoritarian. Tiantian Zheng has a new book called Violent Intimacy, and she shows that the police totally dismiss women who claim that they've been beaten by their husbands. So the state is incredibly authoritarian. The government, which is almost entirely male, has actually decriminalized domestic violence. So it's perfectly legal to smack your wife about, to really hurt her psychologically and physically. So if you don't have feminist activism, if you don't have that pressure on the state to reform, then it doesn't matter if the state is strong. So it's those three conditions. You need all of them, ideally.